You're tuning into Work That Matters, the official Chloeta podcast. To learn more about us, visit chloeta.com, CHLOETA.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Work That Matters podcast. This is Mark Masters at Chloeta, and I'm here with my good friend David Comingdeer, who made the trek down from Spade Mountain to the big city of OKC to join us today. So thanks for coming, David.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for inviting me.
So I appreciate it, man. David and I go a long way back, and kind of the first thing I wanted to ask you about was, I know you were involved in the original creation of the Historical Preservation Office for our tribe. We're both Cherokee tribal citizens. The Cherokee Nation. I wanted you to maybe just tell us what that process was like when you were involved in that.
Well, when I don't remember the year, it was the late 90s, and Chad Smith was first elected as our chief, there became a need within our tribe to develop a historic preservation office. And since I was involved in housing and firefighting and land management and environmental quality control within our departments there, and I'd already been doing some archaeological work with the local BIA archaeologists on tribal land with Cherokee projects, I was asked if I would help build the very first tribal historic preservation office for our tribe. And of course, I did. I accepted the position. It had never existed before. And so we started moving into not only consulting with other tribes that historically lived in our area before we did, the Caddo, the Wichita, whatnot. So we had responsibility to consult with tribes that predated our being in Oklahoma, and also to consult with agencies that were working on lands that belonged to us or that used to belong to us back east of the Mississippi River. Mm-hmm. So we had a whole bunch of historical sites within our boundary that were, I wouldn't say unidentified, but not exactly taken care of. They were some historical buildings. Some of them were already on the state register of historic places. One, the Cherokee Capitol building, was not only a state historical site, but a national monument. Only one of 18 in the entire state of Oklahoma is right downtown Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And all of our buildings were in shambles. Mm-hmm. So we had no assessments done. We had no grant money to do any restoration on them. We had the Supreme Court building on Cotuah and Water Street in Tahlequah. The oldest public building in the state of Oklahoma is the Cherokee Nation Supreme Court building, and the only building we had that survived the Civil War. Wow. It was built in 1844. Wow. 5 years after relocation here from the government removal of our people. Sure. So we had some fantastic places that potentially could bring in some opportunities for restoration and tourism to our tribe to visit. So I went to work. I met with people from the National Park Service. My good friend, the president of the National Trail of Tears Association, Jack Baker, former Councilman Jack Baker,
here in Oklahoma City.
Yeah. And a cousin of mine.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He's a great guy and a beloved relative of my family. And so between the Park Service and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and Jack Baker, we started working together to build the very first plan, a historic preservation plan for the Cherokee Nation, and also identify what needed to be done to restore and revitalize our historical buildings and protect some sites where buildings used to be, or ceremonial sites, forgotten cemeteries of our people, because we have been here since the 1830s. So even though this isn't our ancient homeland, we've been here a long time, and we've left a lot of cultural resources in the earth around where we live. And, of course, the tribes that were here before us, all the archaeological sites and prehistoric sites, mound sites that are now within the boundary of the Cherokee Nation, we had to develop a plan to protect all this.
So let me ask you about that. So when you said you went out with the archaeologists for the BIA, those were looking at sites that had happened obviously after 1839, where there was some kind of artifact, right, at a site within the current Cherokee Nation, and you guys would go out and identify those. I mean, the archaeologists would do what they do and find those artifacts and mark that as a cultural site and go through that whole process. I know surprisingly little about this. I mean, we're doing a lot of tribal consultation work, right, in our environmental consulting vertical here at Chloeta, but I don't know a ton about this kind of work, to be honest with you. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. But is that kind of what it was like when you were going out with the BIA archaeologist? It was to identify or analyze these sites where there was some kind of artifact in the earth that was put there post 1839 by one of our people. Is that right?
It encompassed all historical or prehistorical sites that could be impacted by a federally funded tribal project within our boundary. And so the BIA archaeologist, he was the area archaeologist for the Eastern Oklahoma region, BIA, out of Muskogee. His name was Benjamin Barnett. Ended up being a real good friend of mine after we worked together so long. He has since retired. But when we had a tribal project that utilized federal funds or was on tribal trust land, it required certain things to be done, like compliance and assessment and whatnot.
Just like the biological stuff we do on the NEPA
exactly,
site.
All the NEPA documents all had to be done then. And so before a project began, I was what they call a heritage resource technician. Mm-hmm. I was there on behalf of the tribe, sort of as a trust officer at that time, but also to assist the older archaeologist from the BIA because he was just one guy. He didn't have a staff.
Yeah.
So it really helped him to have some local knowledge of a local Cherokee young man like myself to be able to help him navigate through our communities because we don't have street names in our area. You have to know where you're going, and which hollers and which mountains are there. So when we would go into a property where a project was proposed to be done, first and foremost, Ben would bring any state records of prehistoric sites that by archaeologists from the 1930s, 1940s possibly, who stumbled on or turned in some sort of record that there was an archaeological site along some waterway or something. And so we would review any existing records that were held with the state on the area, and then we would go, say there was a prehistoric site on the property that may be impacted by our federal project. We would go and we would do shovel testing, very, very methodical, very organized gridding of the site and some shovel testing to see if the site was still there. Was it accurately recorded in that specific location? Mm-hmm. And does it have boundaries to it? Mm-hmm. And do we need to create an avoidance area around the site? It wasn't meant to stop a project from happening. It was just to
mitigate so it didn't get disturbed.
Just in case. Because a lot of the prehistoric sites, they say, well, it's just a bunch of artifacts. It's just a bunch of lithic scatter. It's just a bunch of grinding bowls from a village. Well, people are buried there too. They lived there. So we had to be very careful about how we proceeded on. Was it a significant site? Was it a few flakes of flint and maybe a dart point? Was it something that maybe a random hunter dropped an arrowhead that may not constitute a village site or anything with any kind of burials? Mm-hmm. Certainly if there was mound features on the property, it would constitute a permanent village setting, and those had to seriously be looked at, not only to avoid destruction of the earthworks of the ancient people, but also try to establish a boundary so that the project could avoid, doing some damage to the site.
And those, obviously we're talking thousands of years before the removal, before we got here in 1839 or through the 1840s, early 40s. So I know you mentioned some of those other tribes that used to inhabit the area, but can you kind of go over those again, what those are, and the kind of, I know a little bit about the culture of our tribe and the 5 civilized tribes because there's a lot of similarity there, right? But I don't know much about the cultures and history of those tribes that were in what is now the Cherokee Nation reservation before we got here in the 1830s.
Yeah, they're the range is impressive. How long some of these sites have been occupied. So you'll have multiple occupation on one very strategic piece of real estate.
Like something near where two waterways come together
Exactly.
or something?
The confluence of two rivers with a piece of high ground that won't flood. Man has lived on places like that since man
Eons.
rose from the earth. I mean,
And so you would just find maybe different tribes or maybe even different civilizations over thousands of years.
Correct.
Layered on top of each other in the soil.
Correct. Wow. And so you'd have layers of occupation on some really strategic sites that have always been prime real estate. And so you would go back into Paleo era of Indian before tribal names were known or whatever, but up into the more recent prehistory, you're looking at Caddo. The Caddo Indian people were native to our area and mound builders, part of the very westernmost Mississippian mound, part of the mound complex of the southeast.
Like the westernmost southeastern mound builders.
Yes, sir.
Basically.
Was right where we live. The Illinois River, the Barren Fork, Clouds Creek, Spavinal Creek, all the places we grew up.
That's where I mean, Clouds Creek's a few miles, 10 miles from where I grew up. So
where these people were spread out. And of course, they had large civic centers like at Spiro, Oklahoma, Spiro Mounds on the Arkansas River. But the thing is, all the waterways, those were the highways of the past, the byways, so to speak. All the water would flow and then go into a bigger river, and then go into a bigger river, and end up in the Arkansas, then end up in the White River, then the Mississippi, down in the Gulf of Mexico. And from there, you can navigate by boat and trade all the way around, the Horn, the Yucatan, and then up
anywhere.
The East Coast, anywhere. And so even though we have these little backwoods sites, they are tied to a very highly organized system of other recorded sites. Some are like world monument sites, like Spiral Mounds and other mound sites in our region. So to accurately recognize those, if they've been recorded, go back in, establish the site is still intact, and it has a boundary, and we can avoid doing any damage to it. And all it does is leave the site intact for maybe future interpretation, because interpreting an archaeological site is very expensive. It's very time-consuming and takes a lot of professional people to do it.
Would that be like, that was where they would come in and do a formal archaeological dig with the whole team and do it real, methodically and in a scientific way?
That's right.
Wow.
So what we did was, our job was not to interpret the site. Our job was to establish that if there was a recorded state site on our property, we would check to make sure, yes, the site is accurately reported, it is here, and we can safely say there's a boundary to it, and we just need to avoid this area.
Were those records pretty good from the state in the 90s, or?
They were.
Wow.
You'd be very surprised. What lies beneath our feet everywhere and is recorded by somebody back in early years of Oklahoma. You can even go back the interviews that were done in the late 1930s, what they call the WPA interviews, or the Indian Pioneer Papers, specifically the Cherokee interviews. Now, they were interviewing people in the 1930s who were alive during the Civil War and post-Civil War era, pre-statehood. So they're interviewing all these old people that were born back in 1850, 1860. And they said, when our people came, the Cherokees, when we arrived here in eastern Oklahoma, there were Indians here. And they would say, where Peavine Creek hits Barren Fork Creek, there were Indian mounds and still fire pits, like they had just left and were going to come back.
Oh my God.
Right where we live. So although those aren't archaeological reports, they are eyewitness testimonies from people who remember their daddy or their granddaddy telling them, when we came in here, there were Indians here. There were already Indians here, and they would say in the interviews where those sites were, the mounds, and the some wooden structures, of where people live in a village.
When everyone thinks about the removal and the displacement of all those tribes from all over the U.S. smushed here together, right, in Oklahoma, a lot of times you don't think about the tribes that were already here, right? And then, so what were some other ones that you mentioned? And besides Caddo, was it Wichita?
There was some Wichita
and Quapaw,
Osage.
Osage.
The Osage seemed like I remember were primarily of interest in the later prehistory of they lived in our area as well.
Like culturally, I'm more familiar with Osage. I don't know anything about Wichita, but culturally, they were way different than the Caddo tribe, right? Those were more plains oriented, I'm guessing, more nomad. I mean, not southeastern mound people, right?
They were not mound people. They were more of a plains traditional hunter type people. When we talk about the Caddo, you're talking about very similar to the Cherokee and the Muskogee Creek, the Choctaw, and the Chickasaw. All of the great mound building tribes of the Southeast. The Caddo were the westernmost edge of that massive society. And so I can't say it comes much further west than maybe Muskogee area or, the mound building. It was mostly east of that. Think of a highway. I can't think of a highway where it would say, east of that highway, but that eastern edge of Oklahoma, it was part of the Caddo domain. And of course, the Osage overlapped in there too. And then you go back into very ancient, artifacts that were 5,000, 8,000, 10,000, 12,000 years old right in our area.
They were probably not just the predecessors of the Caddo tribe, probably predecessors of all the southeastern tribes, right?
Very well could have been, and all of our ancestor.
Wow.
It's hard to say at that point.
Let me ask you another random question, not to get off on a whole unrelated tangent, but one thing I've been interested in the last couple months researching or learning about is the Cherokee Strip, which a lot of Cherokees don't think about or don't even know about. I remember hearing about it when I was a kid in school or history or whatever, but I was reading something a couple months ago, and it just struck me that that was ours at one point, and there was a purpose behind why it was given to us, besides what we have now for the current reservation boundaries. And I don't really know the process of how that went back into land run from being allied to the tribe. But the part that I read that was fascinating just a few months ago, which you probably know this, was that the government said, well, they're going to have somewhere to hunt, and so we'll give them this strip so they can go hunt buffalo, which I know that our people did hunt some eastern buffalo, but it just made me wonder if it wasn't just another symptom of bad tribal consultation by the U.S. government, thinking that, hey, these Cherokees can load up and they're going to go out on the plains and be nomadic for the summer and chase these buffalo. It's like, well, that's not that we didn't use buffalo, but that is not the culture or history of our tribe whatsoever. So.
The strip you're talking about is the Panhandle of Oklahoma,
and the whole northern tier. Really, it was all tier. Of it. And what's funny too is I read some Cherokee accounts that when they got here, they all were, not they all. A lot of people said, well, that land's useless. We're going to stay over here, which is more bountiful, right? Green and less arid and look more like home to a degree, right? The homelands. Yes. And what's funny is, had we known what lay under the earth in terms of oil and gas, we probably would have never gave up that land to the Osage or let it go into allotment. But we didn't know back then. We had no idea what was laying under the surface of the earth.
It wasn't even a concept at that time. The Panhandle of Oklahoma, or the Cherokee Strip, was also called the Cherokee Outlet. If you left the main body of the Cherokee land, where we live, and you went to the northern edge along the Kansas line, and you went straight west, you could get to New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, or of course Kansas. It was an outlet to get to those areas.
without ever leaving the Cherokee Nation.
And you did not leave your tribal boundary. It was almost like a pathway or a sidewalk, so to speak, a thoroughfare to get from the east side of the state to that very tip of the panhandle of Oklahoma, and then access other lands from there. Now, I don't know if that was done as a favor for our people, or if we had an agreement to allow other tribes to use that pathway, or if we even cared. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that from what I can remember being told, that there was a decision made at one point that we will sell that. We will sell that outlet. We'll sell that strip. And that was pre-statehood.
And I think you're right. I think I read the amount, and it was something insane. We sold, I don't know, 20 million acres for like $100,000 or something.
Well, I don't know the amount, but it probably wasn't.
It didn't.
It did probably
maybe in those times, but
today's
but
standard.
even then, I think it probably didn't. Surprisingly, it's gonna be hard to believe, but it sounds like it didn't work out in our favor.
Well, I don't know the amount of money that we sold it for. I don't know what they decided to do, but what they did with the money is the important part.
Okay.
The Cherokee Nation, the leadership of our tribe, took the revenue from that land sale, and they put 50% of it into education of our children.
Talk about forward thinking for 1900.
Pre-Civil War, we had the best schools west of the Mississippi.
You've told me this before. Tell us more about that.
Well, education is the closest thing to magic that you can give another person, a child especially. And so the Cherokees and the other tribes that came here, we had really been through horrible events, the removal processes. I mean, we lost thousands of our people perished along the way. And so instead of, just giving up and rolling over, because the American government had closed the curtain on the Cherokee people, on the tribes here. We were put on the largest POW camp in the world, what they called Oklahoma. That's what it was. The prisoner of war camp, right in the middle of the country. If there was never an uprising, they could come at us from all sides. So instead of being bitter, we decided to do better. And we rebuilt our government, reestablished a constitution in September 6, 1839, just months after the removal. I mean, these people had lost half their families, and they couldn't even give them a proper burial somewhere along that 1,000-mile death march. But they didn't give up. They stuck together. They sat down around the oak tree, and they made council, and they reestablished ourselves to give us a future.
Mm-hmm.
And they drafted a constitution, and they said, we'll educate our people. We'll build a court system. We'll build a legislative body. We'll build a judicial system, and we'll manage our own. And so by 1845, just a few years, 1844, 1845, we had broken our lands up into 9 districts, each with its own district courthouse, with the Supreme Court building being in our capital town of Tahlequah.
Jeez.
This is a
rapid rebuild after the trauma of the removal, right?
Special people. They had to be some of the toughest minded people.
Yeah, mentally toughest.
Emotionally tough to endure what had happened and then rebuild in such a magnificent way so fast.
Wow.
And then by 1850 had started building what we call the seminary schools, the male seminary, female seminary, where all the Cherokee kids could come and get an education on the practical things.
Including female, which was not common outside.
That's right.
Of the tribes at that time. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, but the Cherokees were among the first relative to the non-native settlers, even back east, right, to educate both sexes of their children equally.
Right. That's right.
Long before the removal, right?
It was post-removal.
Okay.
That type of education was post-removal. But the sale of some of our lands that were they said, well, we don't really need that outlet. We don't need that panhandle. We need to educate our kids.
What they use the other half for? Do you know of the money?
I'm sure it went to building better courthouses, and because the courthouses started out being log buildings and later became, more improved buildings, more framed and brick buildings and things. So I'm sure that some of that money was used to build infrastructure. I mean, they didn't have any roads.
Yeah.
They had nothing. It was wilderness. There was no roads. There was no maps of the land. They had to scout out and figure all of this out. And the government issued each one of our grandfathers, the head of a family, they issued each one hoe and one axe.
Wow. I didn't know that.
And so that's what they rebuilt with.
Wow.
Yeah. One hoe and one axe is what we rebuilt our new life.
Wow.
And after, losing that many people, and we fast forward to now, third largest employer in the state.
Right.
I mean, prosperity.
Beyond economically viable.
Yeah, prosperity like we've never seen before within our tribe. I just hope that we don't forget how we got here.
Yep.
And why.
Yep.
And the sacrifices that were made so that we could have this opportunity to experience and enjoy prosperity.
I just had the exact conversation with a friend yesterday. It's like we're in the most viable spot we've ever been in the history of the tribe. So like, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to continue to improve, or are we going to, use those gains for something other than what we should?
We need to be very careful. We need to be very respectful of our forefathers and what they gave us and the lessons that they gave us, so that we can move forward effectively with love and respect for our older people and the ones that haven't been born yet.
And a lot of people maybe that aren't around Indian country or aren't, do business with tribes or around tribes, maybe don't understand what that economic viability looks like. But it's not just us. There are other tribes that are doing really, really well. And ironically, our last guest, one of the things that we were just talking about was the 8A program, and that's allowed some tribes, including our tribe, to not only rival but even potentially exceed their gaming revenue across the entire tribe with government not only supplement it but exceed it in a lot of cases. Government contracting revenue, more so even or as much as the gaming revenue, which is tremendous. So, and I think a lot of people don't really realize that, like, unfortunately, in the world and the society we live, it takes that kind of cash revenue to exercise sovereignty and to be stable and to be respected with our partners. I mean, it's just, unfortunately, the money is a requirement, right? But like, you got to be careful what you do with it too. It's like it takes financial stability and economic viability to be able to exercise your sovereign rights as a tribe, I think. But it's kind of like a double-edged sword, I guess. You know what I mean?
It takes mature leadership that really looks inward.
Yeah.
Towards its people and remembers what our forefathers passed down.
Yeah.
And the level of sacrifice that the leaders should make for the good of their people. That's a core value of our tribe. It's to, if we have to sacrifice ourselves, we will, if it's in the best interest of the children and the children to come. That's a basic core value of the Cherokee Indian. And I would hope that our leaders would embrace that concept as they move forward with the revenues that are coming in today. I don't think we're putting 50% into our education by any means, maybe 1% or a part of 1%, but the world has changed a lot.
Yeah. We said we weren't going to talk about tribal politics, so I'll move us on because we're getting close. That's where we always end up. Yeah. But so shifting gears on you, man. I know you haven't done a ton of work yet. I know it's a pretty small project, but from a business standpoint, We do quite a bit of environmental consulting, NEPA compliance, stuff like that. And along with that, we're getting pulled into by our clients more cultural resources work. A lot of it's being done by subcontractors, archaeology firms, several different ones that work for us, but also the tribal consultation piece of that as well. And so that's an area where we've done some work. We've subbed out a lot of work, but we're currently working on bringing some of that work in-house. And so I know you haven't done much yet, but I was just wanting to talk about this one project that we do have you working on now that we hope to continue to get more of these kind of projects and bring them in-house and use you and some other folks that we have on those. So that project it's grant funded. It's for the National Wildlife Foundation. It's through a large business government contractor teaming partner that we're subcontracted to help with a small piece of the overall thing, which is the tribal consultation piece. And it's called the America the Beautiful Technical Assistance Project. But can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, just like what we talked about with our tribe, the projects that go on with our land, they use federal money. It's a federal undertaking, so you have to follow all of these guidelines. With federal money comes all the rules.
Right.
So, to effectively consult with the tribes in a respectful way is very important. Now, in this day and age, most tribes probably have a tribal historic preservation officer. 25 years ago, no tribes had that. They were at the mercy of whatever state they lived in to house records, or maybe they had some oral histories, or something of their sensitive sites within their boundary. But today, you have, I would imagine, hundreds of bona fide tribal historic preservation officers with staffed offices within those tribes. I know that most tribes in Oklahoma have that, and so those are going to be the people you would consult with. And I believe probably every THPO is a member of a citizen of the tribe they work for, which makes sense. They're from that tribe.
Mm-hmm.
So making contact with those people and building a relationship with them, and making sure they feel comfortable, they feel confident in what we do and how we present things to them, and honor their timeline in order to respond. It's the best we can do. I mean,
Right.
that's a great working relationship.
Right. So what is this project, that National Wildlife Foundation, this project that I just mentioned, do you know what that is? I know you said that there were a ton of different tribes involved, like dozens, but do you know what what's the actual work of the project? What's the actual intent of the project? Is to coordinate with all these different tribes on something that the DOD's wanting to do or something like that, or do you know?
It seemed like most of it had to do with groundbreaking.
Okay.
So there was either some forestry work, maybe road improvement, road widening.
Gotcha.
You get into breaking ground, and anytime you have a federal project where you're actually breaking ground, it's a federal undertaking, and all of these NEPA requirements fall in. So there was not just one or two different projects per tribe. There were 50 different tribes with tons of different projects each one of them were doing, and they're all going to require some sort of consultation, both environmentally and, of course, culturally with the tribes. So each one will have to be taken individually and looked at from a professional standpoint. How best is it to navigate through all the consultation process and environmental requirements for this project, including working with those cultural leaders or THPOs from each individual tribe, if they have them, and I think most of them do now.
Makes sense, man. Shifting gears another direction on you. So a lot of people are not familiar with what 638 compacting is, and I'm not an expert in it by any means, but just have dealt with it in being a BIA employee previously, and I know you've worked as a tribal employee of a tribe in a 638 compacted program, but maybe for our viewers or listeners that aren't familiar with that process, I mean, my understanding of it is the way that I tell people to think about it is the government has certain trust responsibilities to tribes, right? And that's spelled out in law. And it can be healthcare, it can be natural resources, environmental, cultural. It can be a number of different things, right? And if and on for the tribes, the federal government provides that via Indian Health Services, BIE, BIA, right? But under the self-determination and self-governance capabilities that are out there to tribes, if a tribe can demonstrate that they can self-govern, then they can essentially petition the federal government to take that program over, to manage it in-house, to receive the funds that the federal government would have used on it, and then oftentimes they supplement it with their own tribal funds to improve the program, and then they manage that program, whatever it may be. And our Cherokee healthcare system and the Chickasaws have really done a good job as well, or a really good example of that. But maybe if that's not accurate, tell us, kind of what your experience has been working in 638 compacted programs versus seeing maybe, we deal with a lot of tribes in the western U.S. For a lot of the work that we do, and for a lot of those reservation-based tribes that are still totally reliant upon IHS and BIA for all their services, the level of service that those tribal citizens are receiving is far different than what a Chickasaw or a Cherokee is receiving potentially when they go to request some kind of service from the tribe.
That's right. When you compact your responsibilities from the BIA, you are taking on a huge responsibility. Now, there are lots of different programs that you can do that with. One of the probably the most obvious parts of the Cherokee Nation that we compacted and took back and sort of exercised our sovereignty on was Sequoia High School. The school's been there since 1871, just after the Civil War ended, and was run by the BIA up until the 90s. And Chief Chad Smith, former Chief Smith, decided to compact all of the educational responsibilities of that school. And so what had been basically a residential school of assimilation, a government-funded school to take an Indian and turn them into a good tax-paying American and assimilate them.
People don't understand that these concepts of assimilation were still occurring up into the 90s and even beyond, and until the current day, right? I mean, in some ways.
We're still trying to mitigate the damage by some of the schools. We've got some residential schools that they're a lot better now. They're a lot better. But the policy was to bring the Indian in as a youngster for 12 years, put him in a uniform, teach him to speak English and not speak his own language. So when that child was digested through that assimilation school compulsory education system, when he would be put back out into his tribal reservation, he's going to break the next 3 or 4 generations of people for you. He's not going to be a Native American anymore. He's legally an Indian because of his bloodline, but culturally, the Indian is gone. So we went through all of this, and when we compacted Sequoia High School, that went from a school of last resort for troubled kids from all over. Our own parents went there. That went from a school of last resort to a school of excellence. And when my daughter Tara graduated, all my kids graduated there, but when my daughter Tara graduated, there was a senior class of about 80 kids. Almost half of those Indian children were Gates scholars.
I believe it, and I've seen the numbers that some of the highest population density of Millennium Gate scholars in the U.S. is there, right here in the Cherokee Nation.
Once we took our school over, we still got that BIA funding, like you talked about.
Sure.
We still got that baseline funding.
And that's what it is. It's a minimum. That's the floor, right?
It's the floor. It's the minimum baseline funding. We could add to that whatever we wanted. And we could set the curriculum a little bit more to what we needed for our people. And we went from a school of last resort to a school with a waiting list a mile long of kids trying to get in that school. And so that's a shining example of what can happen when a tribe really takes on the compact responsibilities of whatever they decided to take back from the federal government. And a lot of the tribes, they're not there yet. It's okay. That's fine. So they're fully funded by BIA. A whole bunch of them still are. Some of them have nothing to do with the federal government. They don't even take federal funds in.
Yeah.
But the Cherokee Nation still is 75% funded by the federal government in its annual operating fund. So sovereignty is partial still, but bit by bit, we're taking pieces.
Right.
The Indian Health Service, the education system, the natural resources, we're taking some of these back. Food distribution, social service programs, we're compacting those and taking them on ourselves.
This has been a long time ago, but we're doing pretty good for a couple old fire guys. But when Dave and I used to be wildland firefighters together, we would joke, we're buying it back acre by acre and putting it back into trust 1 acre at a time.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
Well, that's a really good segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about with you, which is something I know you're very passionate about, and it's not stickball. We'll get to that, but language revitalization. And when you were talking about the transformation that's occurred through the 638 compact process with our tribe with Sequoia School, it made me think about the immersion school and the ability to set down curriculum. But as one of our treasured native language speakers, maybe you could talk a little bit about the status of our tribe's language revitalization, and then also maybe what you know about any other tribes that are trying to do something similar.
The immersion program, I have to go back to former Chief Smith again.
Yep.
The guy really did some amazing things.
Yep.
For planting seeds
that are still with us,
still
right?
with us. And one of the things he did was to build an immersion school. And the reason he did that was, I know an elder gentleman he spoke to in Tahlequah one day, and he said, "Sir, what is your opinion? What do I need to do as the chief in order to get our language, a rejuvenation of our language to occur?" And the elder man said, "You need to talk to the Hawaiians." The Hawaiians? You need to talk to the Hawaiians. So a group of elder speakers was formed. I knew all of them. They're not all with us now, but they went to Hawaii.
Wow.
And they visited with the Hawaiian language immersion founders, because the Hawaiian language was almost gone. They just had bits and pieces, words, a few isolated speakers left. But what they have done over there is taken and immersed their children back in the language, and now they have hundreds and hundreds of speakers. And so that's where it started.
Do you know about when that was?
That would have been
late 90s again?
Late 90s, 97, 98-ish, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Actually, probably about 98 or 99. I think it's when Chief Smith came in. Right around 99 maybe. And so been quite a few years ago now. But the immersion program, like anything like that, you're doing a reverse assimilation. It is extremely difficult, because to reverse what has been done
for generations
for
now,
100 years, No Cherokee, 100 years, compulsory education system, 100 years, arithmetic, English, social studies, civics, no culture of your own is going to be discussed here. No language that you speak at home is going to be spoken here. 100 years of this. You have to reverse that. It is very, very challenging. It is very challenging. So most parents today are what we would call assimilated Indian people. I'm not speaking for all tribes, I'm speaking for my tribe. To remove those children from their home, their assimilated Eastern Oklahoma Cherokee home, and put them in an environment to restore their cultural identity and their language is not something that most parents are willing to. You're reversing the assimilation, so it's just as cruel
Yeah.
in a way. So we have to tread very lightly when moving into revitalizing a language. And that's been primarily the challenge. Well, are the kids learning enough that they can compete in college? Or they learn, is learning math in Cherokee relevant to going on into go to OU and become an attorney? I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Well, I saw some data once on the reading comprehension because that was the first thought I had when the immersion school first, was getting its feet under it some years back. Was it's great, right, that we're doing this, but are we putting those kids at a future disadvantage by not having English as their primary language in their educational studies? And one study I saw a few years ago showed that I believe it was based on reading comprehension scores of ACT, so the reading comprehension part of the ACT, and the scores for some of the immersion, the scores for the students who had been through the immersion program, I think it was 3rd through 8th grade at that time, were actually scored higher on English reading composition on their ACT significantly than the Oklahoma average, or something to that effect. I wish I would have hung on to that, but so that shocked me to see that, we're taking children and we can put them through this system where they're speaking very little, if any, English in their educational studies, and spit them out the other end and have them not only still be competitive but excel and score well on their ACT. Like you said, go get those advanced degrees in medicine or law. Go be a Gates Millennium Scholar and have that full ride scholarship. So that's really, really cool to see that like there's no disadvantage to doing that is in terms like in comparison to the public, like public schools, and actually can be an advantage, right? Like the success kind of speaks for itself, I think.
Exercising the brain is just the same as exercising the muscle. When you teach a child to be bilingual or trilingual, their brain strengthens and they become stronger mentally. So there is no mystery that there are advantages to being multilingual. I mean, we have kids from Asia that speak Cantonese and Vietnamese and different languages. Those kids are geniuses, because their brain is exercised so much. And so to teach our children a second language, which is actually their native language now, it does make their mind stronger. I think the challenge with it is the parents. There's such a small number of kids in the immersion program that I think the parents feel a little weird about it. Their kids aren't running around with the other kids and down the road and playing on the same ball teams. It's a real sacrifice. You've really got to encourage those parents to stick with it. A lot of them pull their kids out after a couple of years because the kids, all their friends are going to school down the road playing regular games, and here these immersion kids are out here playing stickball in sort of an isolate within their own community.
Wow.
And it's kind of like, oh, look at those weird kids over there. All they talk is Cherokee.
Wow.
So there's a lot of challenges
Stigma.
even within our own ranks.
Sure, big time stigma.
big time.
It still goes all back to reversing, those 100 years of assimilation.
That's right. And they didn't assimilate Indians 100 years ago so they could put them out to be good Indians again. So to
Reverse the process.
take an assimilated Indian child from an assimilated family, bring them back into
The culture.
a de-assimilation process, what are you putting them back out to be? To be an assimilated Indian or a non-assimilated Indian? I mean, where are we going with it? So I think relevance is where it's going to play in my opinion. And I think to expand the language instead of removing children from the normal school setting, I think it might be a much greater advantage to put teachers out where our schools are already 98% native. And where I live, our school, all of our schools are primarily Indian, over 90%. Some of them 98, 99% Indian. Well, let's put teachers in there and give an hour of Cherokee a day for 8 years, or 9 years, pre-K through 8th grade. That's 9 years. By the time those kids leave 8th grade, they could teach Cherokee.
Probably.
Because they've had an hour of Cherokee a day, the same as they've had an hour of math.
Yep.
They've had an hour of English. I mean, by 8th grade, we're pretty smart academically. So if we could include Cherokee in that and work with the state of Oklahoma to allow us to fit that into the curriculum, we're going to create a whole bunch of jobs for people to teach in those schools. It may not be a certified teacher, but a teacher's aide who specializes in the Cherokee language, and give each one of those kids an hour of Cherokee every day for pre-K through 8th grade. If you want to go on into high school with it, fine. But heck, by 8th grade, they're going to be pretty good. You're going to, just Adair County alone, if you did that, you're going to be making, there's 4,000 students in the county. So every 8th grade graduation, you got 4,000 new Cherokee speakers.
Wow.
The immersion program right now, and the adult immersion program they have, we're creating 6 to 12 speakers a year.
Wow.
Heck, we're losing more than that every month.
Really?
Mortality.
Yeah, it makes sense. I wonder, do you have a firm grasp? I have no idea on what the numbers are and what the trend is. I know the trend's not good, right? Through mortality, we're losing native language speakers, and COVID, like a lot of tribes, hit our tribal people really hard, and even our elders are native language speakers.
Our speakers are dying at a rate way faster than we're producing new second language speakers. It's enough. We're swimming upstream. To be honest with you, Mark. But the strength of the people is there. We just need to encourage and continue to encourage. And if we can get some resources out into the schools in the next decade, before it's all over, we possibly, at the rate we're losing our first language speakers right now, the 1,800 speakers we have, or whatever it is in Oklahoma, we've got about 10 or 12 years.
Wow. How many of those? So basically, if obviously we need to put more into the system, right, than we're losing through mortality. But basically, if we didn't do that, in 10 to 12 years, we may not have any native language speakers left that learned it in the home and were true first language speakers. Is
correct?
Wow.
We've got about a decade, Mark.
Wow.
Yeah. We're there.
Yeah. It's knocking on the door. Yeah. Knocking on the door.
You and I will be about 60 when that time comes.
Well, that's a good probably ending for the language stuff. But let me ask you this, man. I kind of saved this to last. For some of our viewers that don't know anything about Cherokee culture, or maybe not even anything about Native American culture, tell us about stickball. I know it's become a huge part of your life in the last couple of years, and you've taken a renewed focus in ensuring that, much like our language, that piece of culture lives on far beyond you.
The stick game is our most ancient sport. Not just the Cherokee Indian, but the Muskogulge, the Creek people, all the Creek tribal towns, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, Yuchi, all these tribes that we come from the southeast originally here in Oklahoma. We brought with us our traditions, our ceremonial grounds, our ceremonial fires were brought here with us and were reestablished here in Oklahoma. Along with that came the ball game, the stick game. And I've played just about every stick game there is with the different tribes and whatnot, but I'm a stick maker. And I've been making ball sticks for 30 years. And what was a seasonal hobby in the spring, I would make 10, 15, 20 pair of sticks a year. Now I'm making, 200 or 300 pair a month.
Wow.
And, since I'm retired from the Federal Fire Service and I can work at home, and there's a need for the native sports equipment that I create there in my shop, I stay busy every day. Even this morning, I had to work from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. in the shop and then hightail it to Chloeta to get here in time to visit with you. And tomorrow I'll be doing the same thing. And then Monday I'll be working again in the shop. So the stick game is the grandfather of field sport here in America, which now we've got worldwide sports that have been inspired from the Southeastern Indian stick game.
Wow.
Any sport that you can think of with two goals and a center line and two equal teams on the field all comes from us.
Makes sense. Soccer, basketball, football,
Rugby,
rugby, hockey,
all those sports are
lacrosse, obviously.
Lacrosse, of course, is the Mohawk Six Nations.
Yeah.
This field sport concept, when the Europeans came here and they witnessed the mighty southeastern tribes with thousands of ball players on the field, they were intrigued, they were entertained, they were amazed. They'd never seen anything at this magnitude.
Mm-hmm.
So all these sports were inspired from it. So that's our contribution, Mark. That is our contribution to the world, is this field competition, the field sport. It's not that we invented football. We invented the concept of the way it's the structure of it.
The two goalposts, the field equally divided in half, the equal teams, and the head-to-head to try and get to the other person's
Full
goal,
contact.
whether it's a basketball, football,
That's
whatever
right.
it is.
They're all very closely. They're all first cousins of each other.
Sure, it makes sense.
Yeah.
When you think about how stickball is played, right?
And their grandfather is our game, the creator's game, stickball. Now, 1491 and back, very highly organized people occupied this continent. We had no disease. Our numbers were strong. Our trade was further than you can even imagine. Our trade routes went all the way across this continent. The ball game, passed down by our forefathers, was originally used to establish dominance. It was a style of war. It was a style of tribal town versus tribal town, tribe versus tribe, to establish real estate transactions. Large pieces of land used for hunting, or tribal town, rivers and stuff where people live. You could set terms for a ball game. A Cherokee could challenge a Creek, or a Creek could challenge a Choctaw tribal town, a village I'm talking about. And if that tribal town had claim of a certain geographic area, say a river valley, or from the river to the coast, or something like that, well, they could be challenged for that for, say, 4 years or 10 years, a certain amount of time. Terms were set. And so if the challenge was met and accepted, they said, yes, we'll let you play us for this river valley. We'll let your warriors compete with our warriors for this river valley for 4 years. So they come together at a designated site and they play the game. And whatever the score of that game is, It was honored. There was no question. And so now the victor got to keep that, either keep or occupy for hunting or whatever resource needs, that river valley for whatever years they set, 4 years or 10 years or whatever.
And is it true sometimes the games will go on for days, day and night? Like,
Yes, and it could be up to 5 miles long, the field.
what?
You're talking about a battle.
I mean, they call it the little brother of war, right?
Yes, it was war. But the Indian didn't have to kill Indian to establish dominance, is what I'm getting at. We learned later how to engage in full, what they call total war, murdering thousands of people to get. The Indian didn't do that. Not our people. We didn't have to do that. I mean, I'm sure there were violent battles and whatnot.
Sure.
But it wasn't widespread violence among our people. We were related to everybody. So even though you had to establish dominance, had to establish land dominance or whatever, they were related people. There were kinships between the tribal towns. Even one might be a Creek, one might be a Cherokee, but they were kin. They had relation.
I'm just trying to picture
blood kinfolk.
a ball field miles long.
Well, you would have people camping along the edge of it. Set up camp for several days, cooking. It was a very festive thing. And if the field was set for a mile, or I've heard rumors up to 5 miles, well, you had a lot of men out there. And so each man didn't run the whole field. The ball would be moved and advanced that 5 mile.
I see.
And people along the way could watch.
I see.
And, some of it was in the woods, some of it was in open ground. It was a battle.
Jeez.
To advance the ball, one ball. To advance that ball, east or west, up that field. There was one ball competition that occurred, I think, if I remember right, it was between a Creek tribal town and a Choctaw tribal town over some land, probably in the Alabama-Georgia line, somewhere in there. Well, that was in the colonial days, British colonies. And the game went on for this piece of property, and in the end, it was a tie or something. I don't know. It got tied up, but the game ended, and there was some irregularities in it. It was either a tie or a draw or something, and so the men had played for a couple of days and were just beat up and wore out, and so they said, "Well, what are we going to do?" So the captains came together and said, "Let's allow our women to break the tie." So the Choctaw women and the Creek women brought in ball sticks, and they played the game. And the Choctaws won. So the Creeks got moved off of that land. But it was honored. They honored this. Okay, well, they won. And it's tiebreaker. A short while later, there was some surveyors. Some of the king's surveyors were surveying what we would call the Georgia line. And those Creeks who had lost that land actually went and helped the king's surveyors because they knew the lay of the land better than the Choctaws who had just won it. And so not only did they honor, but they actually assisted the king's surveyors to make sure that Georgia and the Choctaw line was accurate, because they knew the lay of the land and they knew the boundaries.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting history.
Let me ask you this, and I know you said recently you've started doing larger orders for schools, which is really cool, but are you surprised in the renewed interest in stickball by our youth in the last few years with everything you've been doing?
20 years ago, you wouldn't have found a stickball game going on outside of a ceremonial ground within the Cherokee people. 3 grounds, that's all we got left. Sunday afternoons, warm summer days, there's going to be stickball games going on at them grounds. So you had 80 to 100 people total that were carrying on stickball. Now we got thousands of them, Now they've moved outside the ground in order to play. They're playing at schools. They're playing in these tournaments. It's become a sport outside of the traditional ball grounds, traditional ceremonial grounds, tribal town grounds. It's amazing how that has happened. And I'm proud of the influence that I have had in this resurgence among the young people. And so my job now is to make sticks and teach others to make sticks before I walk on.
How many sets of ball sticks do you think you've made, if you had to guess? 1,000, 5,000?
15,000, 16,000 pairs of sticks, yeah, in my life.
With maybe 90% of those just being in the last couple of years here, as the production's really ramped up because the demand's ramped up?
No, definitely there's been an increase in what I do over the last 5 years, 6 years, but
All still by hand,
all still by hand,
the traditional way.
the only way I know how. Yep. I cut my logs, I split them with wedges and a hammer into staves, and then with my draw knife, I carve them into the shape of the stick. And each tribe has its own different style of sticks,
Which I didn't know until a few months ago, until you showed me that.
So there's all kind of different
nuances between all these different tribes of their different styles of sticks.
And you've got different positions that require different sticks, even within a tribe. So I can make any of them. And boy, the people have really pushed me to advance myself even more. And so I try to teach the young men that I can in my community. One of my sons is a good stick maker. I mean, he's actually, it's hard to tell his sticks from mine. And I thought, man, where did this come from? He just helped me all of his life. And then we didn't want to make him because that was his daddy's thing. He wanted to do his own thing.
Yeah.
But recently he came in the shop and he really surprised me. He knew what he was doing and was very good at it. And I've got some other young men in my community who are, college-age kids that are becoming pretty good stick makers. Now, I've never tried to demonstrate any impatience with them. I'm always there for these guys, and they love coming to the shop and learning more. So we're doing good. We're doing real good. We're making a big difference. And not only making sticks, but even this coming Tuesday, I've got to go to a school full of Cherokees over in Mays County. And those kids are learning about stickball, these Cherokee kids. And I get to go talk to them and explain the game to them. And they're going to have some sticks. And I'm going to show them how I make sticks. And just a good field lesson for these kids. And so I do that all the time. It's a lot of fun to work with the young people. And now some of those young people are in their 30s.
Wow.
I run into them, and they're 30 years old. They have kids of their own. They're calling me, you made my sticks when I was a kid. Can you make some for my son?
Wow.
I've got some families I've made 3 generations of sticks for a family.
That's really cool.
They're very proud of that.
That's super cool, man. Well, what else do you want to talk about, man? It's rare we have the opportunity to sit down and visit.
Yeah, we're both busy men, and we live 3 or 4 hours apart. But I've got 9 grandchildren now.
Congratulations.
And I've got a great-granddaughter.
Yep, you told me that. That's crazy.
We're doing good. Family's strong. Our ceremonial ground is strong. In fact, we're at today's Friday. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, I report down at the East Shoulder Ceremonial Ground. Mm-hmm. I'm the chief at that ground. I have been for 21 years, and I'll hold that chief position until I pass. Mm-hmm. And it goes to, I've got a 7-year-old grandson. It goes to him, my daughter's son. So we're training him to come up to take my place. But tomorrow, we start on our townhouse, and it's an enclosed structure that we're building that we've been saving up money because we're unsubsidized by the tribe. We raise all of our own funds, and we start on that tomorrow. And it's actually it's not going to be built fully traditional because of the maintenance that would come with that. An earthen. I mean, I'm not getting into that. We'll use some modern materials to encapsulate the building, like modern roofing and stuff like that. But the main structure will be traditionally built.
Wow.
The wood beams and whatnot. So it'll be a big open building with one doorway where we'll have seating in there. And that's what we're going to revitalize. That's what we're going to continue to revitalize our language in the winter. Because right now we don't have an indoor place to be at the ceremonial ground. It's more of a summertime place. You've been around the stomp grounds, you know what I'm talking about. So this will be sort of a nice addition to our ground. And as far as I know, it may be the first traditional style townhouse built in alignment with the ceremonial ground post removal.
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah. We're very proud of that.
What are the other two ceremonial grounds? Or where are they at?
They're in Sequoia County.
All three?
No, we're in Cherokee County.
Oh, that's right.
And then the other two are in Sequoia County.
Gotcha. That's really cool.
And we're all good friends with each other. We support each other. So
cool.
Just not a whole lot of us left.
No.
So, we talk about language and 2,000 speakers or 1,800 speakers or 1,200. They always come up with these different numbers. I don't know where they're getting them. The ceremonial people, the ceremonial practitioners of our tribe,
way smaller than that.
Man, we're down to like 150 people that are carrying the weight of the actual foundational structure of our people. This modern government we have, the foundation of that is the tribal towns. The Confederation of Tribal Towns is what made Cherokee Nation.
In the ceremony.
Well, not just the ceremony, but the whole framework of how our original
style of government.
Style of government. It came from the tribal towns. And so the fact that we've gone from 55 tribal towns to 3, and yet, we talk about language revitalization. Well, it's nowhere more relevant than it is within our ceremonial grounds.
Right. Well, it's kind of like, what's the point of revitalizing the language if the rest of the culture falls by the wayside?
There you go. And this is the most important part, which I tell my guys all the time, and my family, my kids. I say, political sovereignty, which we all hear about, sovereignty, politics, money, revenue. None of that can exist without a cultural foundation, not only to become federal recognized, but to remain federal recognized tribe.
That's funny because I was just talking to a friend about this yesterday, but you're exactly right. Like, there's a disconnect there sometimes, right?
There have been 141 tribes in the United States of America who have been disenrolled already and can never get it back. The bloodline's still there. The history's still there. But what did they lose? They lost their culture and they lost their language. So to perpetuate our culture, to perpetuate our language is very important. It's very important. To enjoy political sovereignty, you must have a cultural sovereignty.
There's got to be a basic.
There has to be an unbroken line of culture to hold up those politics. Now, the politics can all go away.
Sure.
Our culture, we still stay federally recognized Indians. We can go back under BIA management. We're still a tribe because we have our language, we have our culture.
Sure. The sovereignty is the culture. It's completely based on the culture.
Completely based on that. It's very interesting.
I never thought about it like that.
We've got 150 people left, Mark.
That's even more scary than
450,000. It's like 1/3,000th of 1% or something. I can't even do the math on this.
Yeah.
And all these people want to be citizens of our tribe. Well, jump in and help us survive.
Right.
My goodness. All assimilated. But if everyone becomes assimilated, We can be. Wilma Mankiller said it every time she gave a speech. When the last Cherokee ceremonial fire goes out, the world of the Cherokee ends. She was talking about our federal recognition. Muskogee Creek, same way.
Well, we got our marching orders. I remember you told me one time, I had grown up in the culture, right? Being from Jay, moved out, lived in Oregon, Idaho, Montana, away from the culture, working for the federal government, and then came back home to work for the BIA. And I remember one day I was in your office in Tahlequah, and you started asking me questions about who my family was, and it was fields. My great grandpa has allotment land that was, 5 miles northeast of Jay on Whitewater. His name was Claude Fields, and was a direct descendant of Richard Fields, the chief, the old man. And I didn't know any of that. I kind of knew of it, I guess, from my grandma, but never really took it seriously, never dug into it. But I just remember being in your office and you telling me, you said it doesn't matter if you're full blood, it doesn't matter if you're 1%, you're Cherokee. And if you don't take an interest in learning your history and learning your culture and learning your language, then when you die, eventually there is no more Cherokee Nation. If everyone had that poor of an attitude about it, then in a generation or two, we're gone. There is no Cherokee Nation.
Our culture does not pass down through the bloodstream.
That's right.
We have to fight for it. We have to encourage. We have to perpetuate. Preserving it, that's like a pickle in a jar. That's preserving. Well, what good is that? Preserve. No. Perpetuate. Cultivate. Push. That's what we need. That's what makes the tribe survive. And those 141 that have been disenrolled, they didn't push. They didn't cultivate. They didn't perpetuate. We're not there yet. We're not done yet. We still have a chance, and we're gonna keep the fight going. From my family and other families like mine, we're gonna keep pushing. We're gonna keep cultivating, keep perpetuating. Look what we've done with stickball in the last 2 decades. My goodness, there are schools climbing over each other to get orders from me for sticks. I mean, they're wanting a bunch of them. So it's what is it helping me do? It helped me put other boys to work. Other boys that can help finish the ball sticks, tie the webbing in them, and they're learning. They're actually learning more about who they are as a human being, and it's bringing some money into changing the financial dynamic of their home, and putting those sticks in the hands of those babies, those little kids, where it just lifts them back up, and they realize they're really important people. And that's the main thing about the culture, is that if we don't keep the importance of our identity, then those kids will grow, and we always want to be a part of something. Well, what are they going to be a part of? They're going to be part of a gang. They're going to be part of a drug community.
Drugs, yeah.
They're going to disrespect themselves and shoot chemicals in their body to what? That our culture doesn't have time for that. So if we establish a strong cultural foundation in our children and empower them and educate them, that's what I said. Education is the closest thing to magic you can give a kid. That includes cultural education. Cultural education. I mean, I don't want to take away the education they're getting, but I want to add to it. I don't want to take away the arithmetic or the civics or the social studies. We got to have that. We're in America. We're Americans.
Right.
But we're also Indians.
That's hard for some people to understand, too.
Yes. So we have double duty, Mark. We have double duty to straddle being a Native American and being an American with dual citizenship. Very unique situation. And Oklahoma is extra special because we have more Indians in Oklahoma than any other state in the Union. 39 independent, sovereign Indian nations, level to level with the U.S. federal government.
Yeah. Government to government
relations. And so we to understand that and be able to move forward as individual churches to each do our best. You called me here. We're having this conversation. This is going to help somebody understand a little bit more about us. That's good. That's what we need to do. We're perpetuating our own tribe today. We're cultivating in somebody. It's going to help somebody. It might help our friends in the room.
Yep.
They might be hearing stuff for the first time. They're going to want to know more. They're going to have their children one day. They're going to want to teach their children. It's cultivation, it's growth. So these conversations are very important. And I'm very grateful that I got to come talk with you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. That's a good note, I think, to end it on. So, unless you have anything else you want to. I think it's perfect.
Jordan, really.
Thank you. So, that'll wrap us up here with my good friend David Comingdeer and the Work That Matters podcast. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Work That Matters, the official Chloeta podcast. Learn more about us at chloeta.com, CHLOETA.com.